Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. In this video, I want to talk about the 5 books I've read last month. So it's a pretty late June wrap-up, but better late than never. The 5 books I read is like a mix of different things. I think I have 2 fantasy books, I have a literary fiction novel, I have a memoir, and then I have a non-fiction book. So it was a pretty diverse reading month for me, and I have some really amazing books to talk about. I'm gonna start with the one I read first, and then I'm gonna just continue in the order I read them in. And the very first one I read is one I read for the Invisible Cities project for Libya. And this is called The Return, Fathers, Sons, and the Land in Between by Hisham Matar. So I was researching what books to read for Libya for the Invisible Cities project, and when I found this book, I was like, this is gonna be the perfect, as I really love to read memoirs. And it felt like this book is gonna give me a great insight into recent history in Libya, and it did. It is a beautifully written, lyrical book, which almost reads like literary fiction. And the author talks about his life and his family in the context of recent history and the Gaddafi regime in Libya. So basically, his father was a really known businessman and also a political figure. So he comes from a very rich background in Libya, and his father was really much anti the Gaddafi regime. And that's why they had to flee from Libya when he was a small boy. And they lived in exile in Cairo, in Egypt. And then some years later, while they were living in exile, his father was actually kidnapped by the Gaddafi regime and he's been taken back to Libya and imprisoned. And now it is 2011 when the author can go back to Libya because the regime was overthrown and he's free to go back. And then this is the story of that return, and through his return and through his experiences, what he experiences after returning, he recounts his life as a child, as a young man in school, living abroad, as a man living, in different places in the world, trying to find his father. And now it is intermingled with what's happening while he is in Libya, trying to locate his father, trying to investigate what happened to him. Because when this regime fell, I guess a lot of prisoners were released, also from the prison in which supposedly his father was held. So he wants to go back, he goes back to find out really what happened. And it is a really tragic, heart-wrenching story of the brutalities of regime, of what people endured. It also recounts a very horrific event which happened, I think, in 1990 in a prison. 1,200 men were massacred and then just buried. So no one really knows exactly what happened that day. And the author tries to find out if his father was among those 1,200. So basically he goes back and then he sees Libya with new eyes, and the country is not the country he would like to return to because it's not the country he knew as a boy. It's so changed. And it's just so heartbreaking to read about what happened. And as it's not a linear narrative, we go a bit back and forth in time, and there are some moments where the author completely goes in tangents, which I didn't feel like was really relevant to the story because the author is an architect, so he begins to write about some architecture in different places, and I just thought, well, why is this relevant? Other than that, I feel like it really gave me a great insight into Libyan recent history, because we go back to when the country was occupied, it was a colony, and we go back to also some of the atrocities which happened during that time, and concentration camps and so on and so forth. So it really gives a picture of a very turbulent recent history, recent 100 years within Libya, and how almost like one oppressive regime was overthrown by another one, and it's a really sad story of what it is to be a son without a father, how important a father figure is for a son and for a family. What I can see on Goodreads, for example, is that people fault this book because it's really masculine within its themes, and it doesn't really take into account women and their side of the story, for example, or the author's mother, the author's wife. But I guess this is really, for me, I mean, I could really see that there was nothing there of a female perspective, because also in the prison, and the population in the prison was mostly male according to this. We don't know anything whether women were also imprisoned or what happened to them. But I guess you would need to go to another book to find that, because this is really much his own experience as a man, as a son, in relation to his father. And I can only recommend it. I think the author has another book, maybe a fiction book out, so maybe I'll read that at some point. The next book I read was Lost Children's Archive by Valeria Luiselli. I've heard a lot about this book when it came out. I think there was such a buzz around it, and I can really see why. It also came out at a time where the main theme of this book was pretty much the focus of US and international press, and that was the children, the refugees from South America or from Mexico, Central America, coming into the US and what's happening to them. And that is the frame of this story, but this story is not about those. This story is about this family who goes on this road trip from New York to Arizona, and what happens on that road trip. And this is a story about this family kind of disintegrating. And in the first part is pretty much about their lives and how this family came together. Basically, the father and the mother, they worked on a common project in New York for many years, and that project brought them together, and they kind of formed a marriage with the mother already having a daughter and the father already had a son from different marriages, and they just came together and were a happy family, I guess, in the duration of that project these people were working on. But now that this project is finished, they all kind of want to go their own way and work on different things, and they kind of drift apart. And this is like their last road trip, because it feels like their family is going to break apart after this. So through this road trip, we kind of see this woman, and she narrates it from her perspective, and we kind of see her life, her interests, the books she reads, and she, at some point, I think she's almost like reviewing books for us, which is, I don't know, I just felt a bit like that it was a bit too pretentious. I just don't know. And it's also fictional book, so reading a fictional book about a fictional character reading books and telling me reviews of those books, I don't know. It also reads a bit like almost like essay collection in a way. I don't know, it just felt like all over the place. And it was, I listened to it, and the voice in the first part of this woman narrator was just so monotone. I also feel like I was a bit confused whether this was a memoir or not, but it is not. It's literary fiction, because I think the author's voice and experiences are so closely related to this woman. I think it's based maybe on the author's life, that is just the author's voice came too much through. I couldn't disassociate the author from the narrator and from this fictional character, basically, and what I'm trying to say. And I just did not gel with that. I don't know. Have you read it? What do you think about it? I think it's a book which is really going to divide people. So I like the second part much more, because it is told from the boy's perspective, and it is the story of what happened to these two children on this road trip. But this story of these two children are interwoven with stories of other children, and also with a story of one specific book they read on this road trip, which is also about lost children. And I feel the way that was written and put together was just beautiful. So overall, I feel like too much happened in this book. It just wanted to do so many things, but it did it on such a level that it can really throw people off. And it really kept those lost children at a distance. And I just wish we could have come a bit more closer to them, especially in the first part, in which they really weren't present. And yeah, it did do a great job in trying to explain how these children are viewed as illegal aliens, so they're not even humanized within the press and within the consciousness of people who hear about these stories. So they're talked about in such a way so as we don't feel like connected to them at all. And then the lost children, of what happens to the children who came into the US but were lost. And that's also quite a large part of this novel. And I think it's just heartbreaking. So I really, really enjoyed the second part. But I don't know what to think about the first. I feel like this novel wanted to do so many things. And it did manage to do it. But I think maybe it was done in a way which I really did not agree with me so much. I think a lot of people really, really enjoy this book, but also many people really don't like it. And I can really tell why. Because I feel like it was written with also such an elevated prose, especially in the first part, that when you look at it and you read the words, it looks and sounds beautiful. But when you try to analyze it a bit, you're like, what is this? Also, maybe the prose, it is beautiful and it is written to, connect to these people and the stories and what they want to tell. But the monotone voice of the narrator, especially in the first part, really I could not focus on the prose and the beauty of it, because I just kept thinking, or I just kept trying to focus instead of just zooming away because of just simply that monotone narration. And then I finished finally, after I don't know how long I was listening to it, to The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie. And this is one of the most amazing fantasy books I have read in a long time. And let me tell you why. So it really took me a long time to read it. I think I was reading snippets of it here and there, but every time I went back to it, I really immersed myself in this story and these characters. And if you love slow, character-focused fantasy books, then this is really, really one for you. I feel like this book and this series by Joe Abercrombie, I feel like it's on a lot of these must-read books series if you're a fantasy reader. And I can really tell why, because these characters are not ones I will forget soon, and I can't wait to get into the second book. So basically, this book is mostly a setup for this world and for what's gonna happen in the next books. So it feels like it's one of these classical fantasy settings in which the country is divided, there's like a threat from abroad, there's war looming on the horizon. We get some glimpses into the political situation, the neighbors, what's brewing, and so on and so forth. But the main focus here is for us to get to know these characters and these people who at the end are gonna band together and embark on an adventure. And that is how this book ended. So I can already imagine that in the next book we're gonna expand on this world and just get things into motion. But I really, really enjoy these characters. So basically we meet these different characters and we really get to know them in this book. and they are so different and so flawed, and they somehow end up together and they go on this adventure. And this is about who these people are, how they came together, and I think they're just amazing, amazing. I don't want to say a lot of things because I think you should check it out yourself if you like fantasy. I'm sure you heard a lot of things about this book if you read fantasy already, but you will really find some favorite characters in here. I especially like the voice and the character of Inquisitor Glocta. I think he's my favorite because he was a soldier and he was captured and imprisoned and tortured for many years, and now he's almost like a cripple. He doesn't have teeth, he can barely walk. He just made basically a young man in an old person's body at this point. And the way he goes about things and the way he works for the Inquisition and what he does and his inner voice is just to die for. I think he's such a pessimist. He is so trodden down by life, and but at the same time, there's something appealing about his character. He's really deep inside a really good man, but it really takes a long time, and it's hard. You have to dig hard to really get to meet that person. We also meet Logan the Ninefinger, who is a barbarian from the north, and his story, and he has some magic, and the way he comes to be in the south among the more classy and less barbaric people, I guess. And then we meet a mage, and who is gonna be, I think, a central part of this story, but we don't really know a lot about him. And at the same time, we also meet an officer who is such a spoiled, good-looking man that he's very surface level, or so it seems, and all he thinks about is just enjoying life and doing least possible things, and this woman he falls in love with, and so on and so forth. And the way they come together, and I just can't wait to meet them again in the second book where they are going to be on this adventure. There's one thing that niggled me. It was the lack of female characters and the very, very two-dimensional way in which the very, very few female characters which were in this book were depicted. Towards the second part, we met at least one more female character, which I think is going to be more integral to the story. But this is pretty much a masculine crew and pretty much a man's world, this fantasy world. And I really hope this is gonna be remedied in the subsequent books, because it's just such a shame. It's just such a shame. So let me know if you have heard about this book, if you're into fantasy or not, or if you have read the next books. Are they as good as this one? I don't think I'm gonna wait too long to pick up the next books, because I'm just dying to know what's happening next. The next book I read was The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappe. I picked this book up for the Invisible Cities project for Israel, because the author is from Israel. And this book is the horrific account of what happened in Israel or in Palestine in 1948. And also the events leading up to that, and what are the consequences of that today. I think this book is great if you want to know about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and how it came about. I think before this book, or before reading, I really did not understand what that conflict was about. And I think now I really have a better picture. And it is just a horrific account of what happened in Israel and with Palestine in those years, because it is the years in which the British kind of left, and they kind of left the country and the Palestinians defenseless against the more and more powerful Israeli community, who had weapons and who had backing from a lot of people and countries and a lot of money and power. And what they did in 1948, but also prior to that, up to, I think, maybe the beginning of 49, to the Palestinian towns and to Palestinian villages in the area. So basically what they did is they cleansed, I think, like approximately 500 villages and cities of Palestinians. So they basically pushed them out and just told them to move away, and just, basically also killed a lot of people and imprisoned a lot of men and children, because basically all men from the age of 10 to 50 were enemies. So what this book and this author tries to prove in some way was that what happened was a systematic thing that the Israelis did on purpose and with intent and with a plan and a strategy. And what it says that this was systematic and that this was ethnic cleansing. It really reveals of what happened there, because this is a part of history which the Israelis really, it seems like, want to hide. They don't want people to know that this is something they did on purpose. And it was just horrific. And especially now with what happened with this conflict not so long ago, I think for me it was quite an eye-opening read. So again, I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions about this today, and especially considering that this is a conflict that is still happening. But for me, this book really gave me a good insight into that specific historical event, and it really made me realize what lies underneath this conflict, which goes on still today. So it is a hard one to read, and it is really a heavy one, because at some point it's really really focused on facts, and it just on and on and on enumerates these villages, and it's really taking them almost village by village, day by day, of what happened. So it went a lot of work went into this book. But it also depicts how the Israelis had a plan and how they mapped the whole area of where Palestinians lived, their villages and their towns, how they mapped it, how they researched it, how they knew who are the people living there and who are the people who spoke out against the Israelis, who participated in maybe earlier uprisings, and how they targeted specifically those people and killed those people when they moved into these places, and they cleansed it basically. So yeah, I can only recommend it if you want to know more about this conflict and you want to understand it better. I will definitely pick up more books, memoirs from Palestinians. I think there are a lot out there, and I think I have a whole list which was circulating around the time where the conflict was really in the media of not so long ago, and I will definitely go back to that list and read some more. There are also some other non-fiction books of the topic, and I think even though this gave me a great insight into that specific event, there are just so many other things which happened in the last 100 years that I want to know more, and I want to have a broader understanding of other decades and other periods as well. So yeah, this is definitely not the last book I will read on the subject. And the last book I read was The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, which is book 3 in the Pappe War series. And this is a fantasy series which is inspired by Chinese history and folklore. So basically, we follow a main character called Rin, and she is a young woman from this southern province in this world, where I guess the less wealthier people live, a poor province that is, and she comes also from a very not privileged background, and she's an orphan and almost one of a kind because her people were all killed in this previous war. So she's orphaned, and she also has a darker skin like everyone living in the south here, and then she works her ass off to get into this elite military academy in the north in Sinegard. And when she goes there among the elite of this country, who all have like kind of lighter skin, more cultured and more, I guess, privileged in a way, but also acting a lot superior than maybe they should, she's really discriminated against when she goes there because of who she is, because of where she comes from, and because of how she looks, and because of the color of her skin. And then she finds out that she is also a shaman because she can commune with the gods, she can channel the phoenix and control fire. And this because of this, she really becomes really central in the war, which is going to unfold and start pretty soon in the first book, and it's going to be the focus of the rest of this series. Her ability to channel the phoenix and control fire is what decides the fate of this war, and she stands against the invaders, against the enemy, almost by herself. Well, not quite, but she is quite important in this whole situation. And there's not a lot of shamans left in this world, so not a lot of people become shamans, because when you become a shaman, you can commune with the gods, and you can wield different powers because of these gods. But also at the same time, these gods are trying to take over your mind, so a lot of people go insane. So there's a mountain in this world in which these shamans who went insane are kind of put to sleep, and they just sleep there for eternity because they are still alive. If they would come back, if they would wake up, they would still channel the gods' powers, but they wouldn't be uncontrollable. So basically, we follow her through this war, through what happens in her country. And I really, really enjoyed it because it really focuses on themes of what is to be a woman in this context. I can only contrast it to a lot of other fantasy series I read, in which the focus and the main character is a young woman. And there's a lot of those, and the majority of those written today, I think, do have a female main protagonist. But here, Rin, even though she's a female, she's young, so she fits the bill. She is so different because she's not defined by her gender. She sacrifices a lot to focus on her career, on being this military figure as opposed to a woman. On top of that, this book really focuses on themes of discrimination, but also racism, because she is discriminated against, but also she comes from a part of the country where darker skinned people live, and she goes to the capital where lighter skinned people live. So there's a conflict of race there to some point. At the same time, she comes from this island called Spear, and she's almost the sole survivor of those people, and she's also discriminated against because of that. And on top of this, throughout this war, there is a foreign invasion happening, or like colonizers who kind of look down upon this whole nation and its people and look at them as lessers and want to come in and mold them into whatever they seem fit. The one thing I would have wanted to know is more about these colonizers and where they come from, because there's a lot of religion and a fanaticism within their world and their view of their religion, but also of how they view other people. But of course, this was focused more on Rin and her people and what happens to them and how they relate to this foreign enemy who comes, and at the end they have to fight them. So I don't want to go into it too much because I don't want to spoil this for you if you want to read it. Bear in mind that this is not like a school setting throughout these 3 books. This is about this war, and that's the main part of this series. I think a lot of people go into it thinking that this is going to be set in a school, and it's something a lot of people like, but it's not. So that's the only thing maybe you should know when you go into it. It's a lot about politics. It's all about war and machinations of war and strategies and so on and so forth. And at the center, there are these few characters who kind of, shape everything, so to speak. But I'm gonna stop now, I guess. I've been talking for a long time and I don't know how I can edit this down to a manageable length at the end. So this is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Goodbye.